Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy. The old mansion creaked and groaned under the weight of years, its halls echoing with the solemn whispers of mourners. Ian Blackwood, patriarch of the family and renowned businessman, had finally succumbed to the ravages of time. His passing left a void in the lives of those who knew him, but none felt it more keenly than his grandson, Weston. As relatives milled about in dark suits and dresses, Weston found himself drifting through the familiar rooms of his grandfather's home. His fingers trailed along the polished mahogany banisters, memories flooding back with each step. The laughter, the holidays, the late-night chats by the fireplace, all seemed to belong to another lifetime now. "Weston, dear," his mother's voice cut through his reverie. "The lawyer's ready to read the will. We need you in the study." With a nod, Weston followed her, his footsteps heavy on the Persian rug. The study, once a sanctuary of warmth and wisdom, now felt cold and empty without Ian's presence. Family members had already gathered, their faces a mix of grief and barely concealed anticipation. The lawyer, a portly man with thinning hair and thick glasses, cleared his throat. "Let us begin," he said, unfolding a crisp document. As the reading progressed, Weston found his mind wandering. He cared little for the division of assets or property. His grandfather had been more than just a source of wealth. He'd been a mentor, a friend, a gateway to worlds of wonder and imagination.
"And to my grandson, Weston,"
the lawyer's voice suddenly sharpened Weston's focus.
"I leave my personal chest of treasures. May you find in it the adventure and wisdom I always saw in you."
Murmurs rippled through the room. Weston blinked, surprised. He knew the chest his grandfather spoke of, an ornate wooden box that had always been off-limits, its contents a mystery that had sparked countless bedtime stories and whispered theories among the grandchildren. After the reading concluded and the family dispersed, Weston found himself alone in his grandfather's bedroom. The chest sat at the foot of the bed, its dark wood gleaming in the late afternoon sun. With trembling hands, he lifted the heavy lid. Inside, nestled among velvet cushions, lay a collection of leather-bound books, their spines etched with gold symbols Weston didn't recognize. Beneath them, a small velvet pouch caught his eye. He opened it, tipping the contents into his palm. A ring tumbled out, a simple band of what looked like tarnished silver, adorned with a single, iridescent stone. As Weston held it up to the light, the stone seemed to pulse with an inner fire, changing colors like an opal. Curiosity got the better of him. Without thinking, he slipped the ring onto his finger. The world lurched. Weston stumbled, gripping the edge of the bed as a wave of dizziness washed over him. When it passed, he straightened, blinking to clear his vision. Something felt off. His clothes hung differently on his frame, and there was a weight on his chest that hadn't been there before. Frowning, Weston turned to the full-length mirror on the closet door. A strangled gasp escaped his lips. Staring back at him was not his familiar reflection, but that of a young woman. He had the same dark hair and green eyes, but softer features, fuller lips, and a decidedly feminine figure. "What the—" Weston's voice came out higher, melodic. He clapped a hand over his mouth, eyes wide with shock. Panic set in. Weston tugged at the ring, trying to pull it off, but it seemed to have fused to his skin. No amount of twisting or pulling would budge it. Okay, think," he muttered, pacing the room. His new body moved differently, hips swaying. It was disorienting, to say the least. A knock at the door made him jump. "Weston," his mother's voice called. "Are you all right in there?" Yeah," he called back, wincing at the unfamiliar pitch of his voice. Just need a minute." He had to figure this out. Grabbing one of the books from the chest, Weston began to flip through it frantically. The pages were filled with intricate diagrams and text in a language he couldn't read, but the illustrations were clear enough. They depicted transformations, people changing shape and form. As he studied the pages, A warmth began to spread from the ring. Weston watched in amazement as his body began to shift again. His hair lengthened, turning a rich auburn. His skin paled, freckles spreading across his nose and cheeks. Even his height changed, leaving him several inches shorter than before. "This is insane," Weston breathed, staring at his new reflection. He was still unmistakably female, but a completely different woman than before. The sound of footsteps in the hallway snapped him back to reality. He couldn't let anyone see him like this. Frantically, he searched the room for something to wear, settling on one of his grandfather's old robes. It was far too large, but it would have to do. Just as he cinched the robe closed, the door opened. His mother stepped in, concern etched on her face. "Weston, what's taking so long? We're all waiting downstairs for—" "Oh," she stopped short, blinking at the strange woman in her father's bedroom. "I'm sorry, I thought— Who are you?" Weston's mind raced. I'm Willa, Weston's friend. He asked me to grab something for him." His mother's brow furrowed. "I see. I didn't realize Weston had brought anyone with him. Well, Willa, please tell Weston we're waiting for him downstairs." As soon as she left, Weston slumped against the wall, heart pounding. This was a disaster. How was he supposed to explain this to his family? How was he supposed to change back? Determined to find answers, he turned back to the books. Hours slipped by as he pored over the arcane texts, piecing together fragments of information. The ring, it seemed, was a powerful magical artifact capable of reshaping reality itself. But its effects were unpredictable, influenced by the wearer's subconscious desires and fears. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, Weston made a startling discovery. According to one of the books, the ring's transformations weren't limited to the wearer. They could extend to the world around them, altering memories and even creating entirely new realities. A chill ran down his spine. What if he'd already changed more than just himself? What if his family's memories had been altered? The thought was terrifying. Steeling himself, Weston decided he needed to see for himself. He crept downstairs, the too large robe trailing behind him. The house was quiet, most of the mourners having left. In the living room, he found his mother and brother, Michael, sitting in silence. Hello?" he said softly, wincing at his unfamiliar voice. His mother looked up, a warm smile spreading across her face. "Willa, dear, there you are. Come, sit with us. Weston told us you'd be joining us for dinner." Weston's heart skipped a beat. He'd told them no such thing. The ring must have altered their memories. "Right, of course," he said, perching nervously on the edge of an armchair. "I'm sorry for your loss." Michael, who had been staring at his phone, looked up with interest. "So, Willa, how do you know my brother? He's never mentioned you before." "Oh, we met at work," Weston improvised, cursing inwardly at how unconvincing he sounded. His mother tilted her head. "Work? But I thought you were a student at the university?" Weston's mind reeled. The ring was creating a backstory for him, or rather for Willa, on the fly. "Right, yes, I am. I meant we met at my part-time job. At the library." "How nice," his mother said, though her eyes held a hint of suspicion. "Weston's always been fond of books. I'm surprised he never mentioned you, though." The conversation continued, growing increasingly surreal for Weston. He found himself navigating a minefield of questions about a life he'd never lived, all while trying to glean information about how much the world had changed around him. As the evening wore on, Weston excused himself, claiming fatigue from the long day. Back in the safety of his grandfather's room, he collapsed onto the bed, his mind whirling. The ring had done more than just change his appearance. It had woven him into a new narrative, creating memories and relationships that had never existed. And yet, underneath it all, he was still Weston. The dichotomy was maddening. Over the next few days, Weston, or Willa, as he was now known to his family, struggled to adapt to his new reality. he discovered that the ring's transformations were not permanent. He could shift between different female forms at will, though returning to his original male body remained frustratingly out of reach. Each new form brought its own set of challenges. As a tall, athletic blonde, he found himself fending off unwanted attention from his own brother, who seemed to have no memory of Willa from that first night. As a curvaceous brunette, he had to navigate the complexities of female friendships with his mother and aunt, who suddenly treated him as a confidant for their deepest secrets. Through it all, Weston continued to study the books his grandfather had left him, searching for a way to undo the ring's magic. But with each passing day, the line between Weston and Willa and all the other women he became grew increasingly blurred. One morning, about a week after the funeral, Weston awoke to find himself in yet another new body. This time, he was a petite redhead with delicate features and vibrant green eyes. As he stared at his reflection, a memory surfaced, not one of Weston's, but of this new persona the ring had created. In this reality, he was Willow, a distant cousin who had come to stay with the family after falling on hard times. The ring had seamlessly inserted her into the family history, complete with childhood memories and shared experiences. Shaken by how real these false memories felt, Weston, now Willow, made his way downstairs. He found his mother in the kitchen, busy preparing breakfast. "Morning, sweetie," she said, glancing up from the stove. "Sleep well?" Weston nodded, still marveling at how naturally his mother accepted each new version of him. "Yeah, thanks. Is there any mail for me?" he asked, fishing for information about his new identity. His mother pointed to a small pile of envelopes on the counter. "Just some bank statements and a letter from your old roommate in Chicago. Oh, and don't forget you have that job interview this afternoon." "Job interview? Chicago?" Weston's head spun as he sifted through the mail, each item providing more details about a life he'd never lived. According to these documents, Willow had recently graduated from college in Chicago and moved back home to regroup after a bad breakup. As he ate breakfast, Weston found himself slipping more and more into the role of Willow. It was disconcerting how easy it was, how natural it felt to discuss plans for the day and reminisce about shared memories that had never actually happened. After breakfast, Weston retreated to his room, which the ring had transformed into a space that perfectly suited Willow's tastes. Soft pastels adorned the walls, and bookshelves lined with novels and art supplies surrounded a cozy window seat. Sitting cross-legged on the bed, Weston closed his eyes and concentrated on the ring. He'd discovered that with enough focus, he could sometimes control the transformations. But this time, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shift back to his original form or even to one of his previous female personas. Frustrated, he turned back to his grandfather's books. There had to be a way to break the ring's hold on him and restore things to normal. As he flipped through the pages, a name caught his eye. Ezra Blackwood, his grandfather's name, scrawled in the margin of one of the texts. Excitement surged through him. This was the first concrete connection he'd found between his grandfather and the ring. Maybe if he could track down more information about Ezra's involvement with these magical artifacts, he could find a way to undo their effects. Weston spent the rest of the morning combing through his grandfather's study, searching for any clues that might lead him to answers. He was so engrossed in his task that he almost forgot about the job interview his mother had mentioned. Rushing to get ready, he found himself instinctively choosing an outfit that Willow would wear, a floral sundress and low heels. It was unsettling how easily he slipped into the role, applying makeup with a practiced hand he'd never used before. The interview was for a position at a local art gallery. As Weston sat across from the interviewer, he found himself drawing on Willow's knowledge and experience, discussing art movements and exhibition planning with an ease that both thrilled and terrified him. "Well, Willow," the interviewer said as they wrapped up, "I must say I'm very impressed. Your passion for art is evident, and your experience in Chicago would be a valuable asset to our team. We'll be in touch soon with our decision." Weston left the gallery in a daze. He'd just interviewed for a job he knew nothing about, in a body that wasn't his own, drawing on experiences he'd never had. And the worst part was, a small part of him had enjoyed it. As he walked home, lost in thought, he nearly collided with a man coming out of a coffee shop. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Weston exclaimed, steadying himself. The man looked up, and Weston felt a jolt of recognition. It was Mr. Holloway, his grandfather's old business partner and closest friend. But unlike Weston's family, Mr. Holloway's eyes showed no recognition of Willow.
"No harm done, miss,"
Mr. Holloway said with a kind smile. Then he paused, studying Weston's face more closely.
"I'm sorry, but do I know you? You seem awfully familiar."
Weston's heart raced. Could Mr. Holloway see through the ring's illusions?
"I'm Willow,"
he said cautiously. "Willow Blackwood. Ezra Blackwood was my uncle." Mr. Holloway's eyebrows shot up. "Ezra's niece? I don't recall him mentioning—" "Wait," he leaned in, lowering his voice. "The ring. You're wearing Ezra's ring, aren't you?" Weston's eyes widened.
"You know about the ring?"
Mr. Holloway glanced around nervously.
"Not here. Come with me."
Weston followed the older man to a nearby park, where they found a secluded bench beneath a sprawling oak tree. As they sat, Mr. Holloway turned to Weston with a grave expression. "I assume you're not really Ezra's niece," he said. It wasn't a question. Weston shook his head. "No, I was his grandson. Weston, the ring, it changed me, and now I can't change back." Mr. Holloway nodded, unsurprised.
"The ring always turns the wearer female. It's part of its nature. Ezra discovered that the hard way."
"Wait, what?" Weston leaned forward, eager for answers.
"My grandfather used the ring too?"
"Oh, yes," Mr. Holloway sighed. "For years. It was his escape from the pressures of his life. He'd become someone else for a while. A waitress, a librarian, once even a famous actress. But he always came back eventually." Weston's mind reeled. The grandfather he thought he knew suddenly seemed like a stranger. But why? And how did he keep it a secret? Mr. Holloway's eyes grew distant. Ezra was a complicated man. The expectations placed on him by his family, his business, society, they weighed on him heavily. The ring gave him freedom, a chance to experience life from entirely different perspectives. As for keeping it secret, well, that's the ring's true power. It doesn't just change you, it changes reality around you to accommodate your new identity. "I've noticed," Weston said dryly. "But how do I change back? How did my grandfather do it?" The older man's expression turned sympathetic. "I'm afraid I don't know the specifics. Ezra guarded that secret closely, but I do know it wasn't easy for him. Each time he changed back, it became harder to resist the pull of the ring. In the end, I think that's why he left it to you. He hoped you might find a better way to use its power." Weston slumped back against the bench, overwhelmed. "But I don't want its power. I just want to be myself again." Mr. Holloway patted his hand gently. "I understand, but consider this. Maybe the ring chose you for a reason. Maybe there's something you need to learn from these experiences." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, Weston bid farewell to Mr. Holloway. His head was spinning with all he'd learned, but he felt no closer to a solution. Over the next few weeks, Weston continued to shift between different female personas, each bringing new challenges and insights. As Willow, he got the job at the art gallery and found himself developing a genuine passion for curation. As Wendy, a tough-as-nails mechanic, he learned the satisfaction of working with his hands and the camaraderie of male-dominated spaces. But with each new identity, Weston felt himself slipping further away from his original self. The memories of his life as a man began to feel distant, dreamlike. He found himself wondering if that life had ever really existed at all. One morning, Weston awoke to find himself in yet another new body. This time, he was a middle-aged woman with silver-streaked dark hair and laugh lines around her eyes. In the mirror, he saw a face that radiated warmth and wisdom. As he made his way downstairs, he was surprised to find the house full of people. Family members he recognized and some he didn't. They all greeted him with hugs and excited chatter. "Mom!" a young woman exclaimed, throwing her arms around him. "Happy birthday!" Weston froze. Mom? Birthday? He searched his mind and found a flood of memories that weren't his own. In this reality, he was Whitney, a beloved mother and aunt celebrating her 50th birthday. The day passed in a whirlwind of celebration. Weston found himself navigating complex family dynamics, offering advice to troubled nieces and nephews, and reminiscing about events he'd never experienced. It was overwhelming, but also strangely fulfilling. As the party wound down and the last guests departed, Weston retreated to the quiet of the study. He sank into his grandfather's old leather chair, fingers tracing the worn armrests. "Quite a day, wasn't it?" a familiar voice said. Weston looked up to see Mr. Holloway standing in the doorway. Unlike the others, his eyes held recognition. He saw through the ring's illusion. "Mr. Holloway," Weston sighed. "I don't know how much more of this I can take. Every time I change, it gets harder to remember who I really am." The older man nodded sympathetically. "I understand. But tell me, Weston, what have you learned from these experiences?" Weston was quiet for a long moment, reflecting on the weeks since his grandfather's death. "I've learned so much," he finally said. "About art, about mechanics, about family dynamics. I've seen the world from so many different perspectives. I've felt the fear of walking alone at night as a woman, the frustration of not being taken seriously in male-dominated fields, the joy of creating and nurturing." Mr. Holloway smiled. "And do you think you would have gained these insights as quickly or at all if you'd remained Weston?" "No," Weston admitted. "But that doesn't change the fact that I want my life back, my real life." "Are you sure?" Mr. Holloway asked gently. "The ring responds to our deepest desires, Weston. If you truly wanted to return to your original form, you would have by now." The words hit Weston like a physical blow. Was it true? Had some part of him been resisting the change back? He thought of the satisfaction he'd felt curating his first art show as Willow, the pride of fixing a car engine as Wendy, the love he'd experienced today as Whitney. I don't know what I want anymore," Weston confessed, his voice breaking. Mr. Holloway laid a comforting hand on his shoulder. "That's okay. The beauty of the ring is that it gives you time to figure it out. But remember, Weston, the power to change back has always been within you. When you're ready, you'll find the way." As Mr. Holloway left, Weston sat in the darkening study, lost in thought. He thought of his grandfather, using the ring to escape the pressures of his life. He thought of all the lives he'd lived over the past weeks, the joys and sorrows he'd experienced. Slowly, Weston slipped the ring from his finger. He held it up to the fading light, watching as it caught and refracted the golden hues of sunset. For the first time since his grandfather's death, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. He may not have all the answers yet, but he was beginning to understand the gift his grandfather had given him. It wasn't just a magical artifact. It was a chance to see the world through new eyes, to walk in others' shoes, to grow in ways he never could have imagined. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more wonderful content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.